Michael, very pleased to be with you. Estamos preocupados, en México estamos preocupados porque nuestro país tiene rasgos de mucha violencia. A nivel social hay una descomposición importante, hay grupos de poder ilegales que buscan la hegemonía en ciertas regiones y siempre pensamos que el deporte y el fútbol en particular vive aparte, que es otra cosa. Yo creo que el fútbol es simplemente un reflejo de otras cosas que también están sucediendo. Voy a permitirme hacer las preguntas en español con Michael porque mi inglés no es británico, es de Valbuena y a mucha honra. Pero es a efectos de lograr mayor precisión en las preguntas porque me parece que es un tema que a todos nosotros nos interesa muchísimo. Michael, muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. La primera pregunta, cuando nosotros imaginamos violencia en el fútbol, inmediatamente nos remitimos a Inglaterra, a los hooligans, a un problema muy severo que se vivió durante un espacio largo de tiempo y que finalmente fue controlado. Hoy que empezamos a tener problemas de violencia en nuestro país, en algunos estadios de fútbol, donde la gente se salta al terreno de juego, etcétera, también nos remitimos a Inglaterra, pero no para recordar la mala época, sino cómo se resolvió. Michael Cunnah, entre otras cosas, fue, como le decía, director del estadio de Wembley, trabajó en clubes de la Liga Premier, en la Liga Premier y tiene mucha experiencia en la materia. Por lo tanto, Michael, por favor, ilústranos, en primer lugar, cómo ocurrió y cómo se resolvió el tema de violencia en el fútbol inglés.
Okay, thank you. You're probably right, and it kind of is slightly painful when you say that people think of England, they think of hooligans, and that was the way that we were. And partly getting out of that situation is an acceptance that that's who you are and what you do and you want to change. It's been probably 30 or 40 years. I mean, we had violence, but it really then brought some very, very tragic accidents. Some of them actually were not violence. There were fires at stadiums and things like that. Others were violence related. And football in England got to a very low point. It was unfashionable. It was something that people didn't want to be associated with. And clearly with the success of the Premier League and English football now, somehow we found a way out of that. I think that several things were tried. Some of them didn't work. And I think that the good news for a country like Mexico or any other is that you can look at what we did. You can see what didn't work. Sometimes some ideas appear logical, but actually they're completely wrong and they have the opposite effect to the one you want. And I think that the bottom line is that you can change if you want. You are absolutely right when you say this is a society problem. It's not just football. And the lessons that England learned was that football couldn't solve this on its own. It needed the rest of society, it needed government, it needed the police. Everybody had to get together and really cooperate and work in a different way. And there's, I can see a clock ticking over there saying that we've got 20 minutes. I actually could talk about it for hours. In the sense that there are so many different elements, and please ask questions to try and prompt certain parts of it. But I think that the bottom line was that in England, basically what we learned was that if we treat fans better, they behave better. If you treat them like animals, they behave like animals. And certainly there were some times when, law-abiding fans got herded around, and the automatic assumption was they're hooligans, they're here to cause trouble. They weren't, they were football fans, they wanted to go and see a match. But in the end, even good, nice, placid people will react if they're being badly treated. And so that's where we were getting it very wrong in the old days. So many of the things that have happened is it's actually all about very, very early planning for every match. It's about preparation, categorizing matches. You know if you've got a match against your fiercest rivals, it is potentially going to kick off at some point. So you start the planning for that maybe 3 months in advance. You get to talk to the police then, and you literally just plot your way through it, and you make sure that everything is thought about and taken care of. So it's not to say that violence has gone away completely, at all, but the people involved and the police and the government have learned how to manage the situation. Actually, the police, it's very interesting because I know that here probably there is a big police presence or security forces, and as soon as there's trouble, they wade in and they hit people and try and get them to sit down or stop. What's happened in the UK is that the police have now a bigger role to play, but not in the stadium. There's less police present in the stadiums. The role that the police play now is very much in terms of intelligence gathering, finding out, and the advent of social media, I think, has helped them do this. Find out when there's trouble planned, when gangs are saying, hey, we're playing you 3 weeks' time, you better watch out. They know when those things are going on. Because the policing of a match doesn't start in the stadium. It starts at the beginning of people's travel to the stadiums. And even to some extent, one of the things that our country was most embarrassed about was the fact that when the national team qualified for either the World Cup or the European Championships, we'd think, oh no, it's coming soon, and we knew that all of our worst hooligans would go and they'd start fights, and we'd be embarrassed internationally. And it was interesting because we all know, these people are well-known hooligans, many of them have been convicted, and you're like, why do we let them do that? And it was a big debate for a long time in the country, and there were a lot of people who said, you can't stop these people traveling, it's against their human rights. And I guess something happened, and the government decided, enough's enough. I think it was probably the European Championships in Holland and Belgium in 2000. And after that, they said, okay, we're going to take away the passports of all the people that we know that are troublemakers. And every time we've played at a major championship since then, there's been no problems whatsoever. So, it's about intelligence, it's about planning, it's about organizations, governments, whoever, willing to take the right steps in order to solve the problems that are there. But it is possible.
Me parece que en México es un problema reciente. Me parece que en México es un problema nuevo, relativamente nuevo. Por lo tanto, tenemos la impresión, muchos de nosotros, que la policía, los grupos de seguridad no están preparados, no saben manejar este tipo de situaciones, lo cual podría ser más peligroso todavía un brote de violencia, porque se puede generar más violencia todavía.
Well, I would agree with you that potentially that's the case. As I say, we learned that it isn't just about being nice to people, although that's a large part of it, and the football stadiums, the football clubs up and down the country recruited a lot of stewards. They had a lot of training, as though they were in shops and they were serving customers. These are important people, they're our customers, and treat them like that. And also, I have to admit, actually, inside the stadium in England, the clubs have to pay the police force if they have policemen. And, part of the transition to stewarding was the fact that a steward's a lot cheaper than a policeman. And football clubs are commercial organizations, and this made sense. But actually, it was more than that, because it was the customer service thing. And the role of the stewards is really to provide the best customer service to the point when there becomes an incident. And then, of course, they have to kick into incident management mode. And that's where the stewards need to be trained, because when an incident kicks off in a stadium, the stewards closest to it, first of all, have to work out whether they can deal with it or go up the line to get advice. But and it's not an easy decision, because sometimes, I mean, if you can imagine going into the middle of a row of seats like this and trying to drag somebody out, then suddenly everybody else gets involved. And so, you know, you have to decide whether you're going to create more of an incident by wading in or less of an incident by kind of, you know, and then maybe at half time, take those people out, you know. So it's all about managing in the best way possible. You know, the thing that has helped, of course, is that since the tragedies and the incidents of the 1980s, then our stadiums have been upgraded. Many of them are brand new, and they're all-seater stadiums, and they have CCTV cameras all around. So actually, it's much easier to control the crowd internally, and of course, it's easier to work out where that person was and what seat they were sitting in, because the CCTV can really home in on that. And to some extent, I guess the troublemakers, the hooligans, realized that was the case, and therefore, if there is to be any trouble, actually it will be outside the stadium. Mm-hmm. And that's where the police come in again, because then they're controlling the streets or whatever. And again, that's where the intelligence comes in, which is, you know, helps them to manage the whole affair. But it is about pre-planning, and it is about trying to get things right according to that match. And you can predict this match will be safe. This is two teams that, you know, they don't mean anything to each other than that game on Saturday. And then there's others who are fierce rivals, either because of proximity or because they're fighting for the same trophy or whatever. So you can spot those matches a mile off. And sometimes those matches are very well controlled. So it's not that everybody loves everybody all the time, and you take certain decisions. So if you get a match, take an example, my team Sunderland, northeast of the country, 12 miles away, Newcastle, fierce rivals, and it always will be. And so what happens when, let's say, Sunderland plays at Newcastle, and the police sit down and it's all planned beforehand. Now, Sunderland will get an allocation of maybe 3,000 seats in the Newcastle Stadium. So first of all, they think, well, we don't want everybody drinking lots of alcohol before this match, because that might be a problem. So we'll kick off at 12 noon on a Sunday. Everybody moans, and it's not popular, but they understand why they've done it. They then instruct the Sunderland fans to go to the Sunderland Stadium, not the Newcastle Stadium, and they get on coaches, and those coaches are given a police escort through to the Newcastle Stadium, and kind of the same thing happens on the way back. And some people say, do you know what, that's overkill, but in the police's decision, that's the way to manage the situation and to take out the possibility of confrontation. And, you know, it works. So it's every match is different. Every match needs to be assessed. The planning starts 3 months in advance, and it works all the way through to the match day. And all of the emergency authorities, not just the police, but the fire brigade, you know, ambulance, the local authority, the club itself, they'll all be involved in that planning, and all the way through the gathering intelligence, and then they manage the match according to how they think it needs to be handled.
What is the breaking point to solve the problem? In prevention, in punishment, or education?
Well, I guess there's always an element of all three. Punishment, I suppose, is where it's gone wrong, and somebody has been violent or got onto the pitch or done something. It's about putting the right regulations in place. It starts off by people, you know, in England now, there are regulations about how you manage a stadium, both in terms of how a stadium should be constructed, but also how it should be operated on a match day. So actually, those responsible for the match on the match day have to go through a series of pre-event checks, so they can say they've got the people they need with the skills, with, you know, they've got all the equipment they need, and it's recently been serviced and it's working, and so on and so on. They need to show all of that before they then get the approval to open the gates and let everybody in. So at least everything's working, there's nothing missing. They've done all the preparation that I was talking about. And therefore, it's possible that the authorities can then go and say, show us your plans, show us the, so in that sense, everybody has to be working responsibly. So that's the preparation. The education goes hand in hand because it's part of the regulation, and of course, so partly you're educating the people who are running the events, but then you're educating the people who are going to come along. But again, you can't expect fans to go through courses and pass exams and say, hey, I'm now a fully fledged fan. So that's why you have stewards who are on hand to say, which seat you're trying to get to, or it's down there, or and be helpful on the day. I mean, clearly, if you have a stadium where maybe you've got 60 or 70% of the seats are season ticket holders, actually they don't need help getting to the seat. They do it every 2 weeks, and they know their way through. So it's to make sure, like anything else, that people know what they're doing, know what to expect, and know how to behave. The punishment, as I was saying, with the government taking away the passports of the hooligans, if you're hitting somebody and beating somebody up in a football stadium, it's no different to doing it in the street. So the same penalty should apply. And in fact, there shouldn't be a get-out which says, it's all right, he did it in the stadium. No, it was a football argument. No, it's still violence. So all of those have to come into play, but not necessarily, they're not all as desirable as others.
Y yo sé que puede haber muchas inquietudes en el auditorio también. Si alguien gusta hacer alguna pregunta, yo tengo un par por ahí, pero termina el tiempo que sea previa, pero si alguien gusta hacer alguna pregunta a Michael sobre lo que ocurrió en Inglaterra, sobre la seguridad, sobre los estadios, con mucho gusto están los micrófonos a su disposición. Sí, por aquí si nos ayudan.
Well, since you know all the security measures that take part in order to prevent all these events that might, spoil a match, then how can we implement those measures here in Mexico? Because very often do we find ourselves dealing with domestic violence within the stadiums, just like the last weekend. So I was wondering, how could we implement security measures to lower this violence index in the country? Thank you.
Well, without knowing the details of why the violence occurred and who was involved, I guess, at the risk of repetition, I go back to saying, look, if you were hosting that match, you have to go back to saying, well in advance, is there likely to be trouble at this match? Are there any preventative measures we could take? Is the crowd segregated? Should we be making sure they're kept apart, and therefore any potential confrontation is going to be avoided? And there are, if the police and if the violence that you're experiencing is gang related, well, it's like any other gang violence. You're going to have to find out what the source is, and even if you can't solve it in a sense in football, you're going to have to work out how to manage that. And I appreciate gangs can be very violent, very threatening, and very frightening, and have power in certain circumstances. But in other areas, there's an example in our football, the Welsh club Cardiff City, who moved from their old stadium to their new stadium, and the new, old stadium was horrible, and the new stadium is all shiny and very nice. And they actually said to themselves, do you know what? It would be nice to start again, because our image is horrible. Everybody thinks of Cardiff City and they think of violence. We'd really like to have this fresh start with a new stadium. And they decided to do something about it. And they got with their fans and they said, we want to know who the troublemakers are. And they had little ambassadors in the stadium, and they had numbers to, texts or emails to be able to send. And once they identified who the troublemakers were, Cardiff City banned them. And what they found was that over time, then families started to come back to this stadium, and young people were coming because it was a nicer place to be. So, there are measures like that which you can take if you're serious and if you understand the situation. As I say, a few thugs or hooligans in Cardiff may be slightly different to some vicious gangs elsewhere, but you have to understand what the problem is to work out what it is you can use to get rid of the problem.
¿Alguna más? Sí.
Hi. You talked about you talked about authority, but I would like to know what you think about moral authority. The fact that young people are not going with their families anymore to the stadiums. Do you think that is some kind of a cause for that problem?
I think that just relates to the story I was telling about Cardiff City. If a stadium's not a nice environment, then people won't go, and particularly families won't go because they're frightened of the violence, or they don't want their children to see this or experience it. So from that point of view, yes, I mean, I think the right way through would be the Cardiff example, where you make a decision and you say, right, we're going to do something about it. But it takes everybody to do something about it. It has to be a combined effort. I mean, on the more, just for a moment, on a more positive note, there are some initiatives where clubs have really tried to welcome away fans, because it's usually this aggression between home and away fans. And one good example, lots of clubs now do this, but I think the first club in the UK to do it was Brighton. Now, stadia in the UK have very good segregation, both on the terraces, but underneath the terraces where people go, to get a drink, get something to eat, go to the toilet, whatever. And what they started to do is, when they were playing, let's say, Arsenal, the Arsenal fans would come down into the concourse and they'd find that actually it looked quite red. I mean, Brighton playing blue. And when they looked at the screens, it had Arsenal football on. And when they went to the bar, it would have beers you can get in London and things like that. So they'd taken this initiative to say, do you know what, we actually do care about you, we thought about you, and look, we've even got your own beer here for you to drink. And they said, not only did they get great feedback from those clubs whose fans had been, said the other thing which was really interesting was there was so much less damage to the seats and all the other things in their area. So it goes back to what I was saying early on. There are things you can try. And you know what, if they don't work, don't do them again. But sometimes like that, you have a very, very positive report. And if that's true, then tell everybody else. And in the UK, most clubs are doing that now.
Nos da tiempo para una pregunta más. Por ahí andaba. Adelante, por favor.
Hi, my name is Gabi. Well, in Mexico, personal interests are more important than society safety. What will you say to those people in charge to try to convince them to actually act, like do something to prevent?
I guess I wouldn't presume to tell them to do anything. And I guess you can't, they have to want to do it. There has to be the point that we reached in England probably 30 years ago, where he said, this can't go on, we have to do something different. Because everybody has to be involved, and the government has a big role to play, and the police have to change the way they operate. But the good news is it is possible. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Well, I mean, it has to happen like people die or something. Like Mexico is really peculiar things to manage football in particular.
No, it doesn't have to be people dying, and please, let's hope it isn't. Since I actually got here, in fact, even well before I got here, Arno's in touch with me saying, oh my God, can you speak about this, because this is what's happening. It's uppermost in everybody's minds, I can tell, because they want to talk about it. You want to talk about it. Look, if the Mexican football authorities are in the same place, it's a conversation that everybody can start. It's a conversation that the Mexican football authorities could have with the Mexican government, could have with the Mexican police. And it's not that they need to make anybody wrong, or you haven't done this or whatever, but you could say, you know what, let's see if there's a different way to do it. What are they doing in England? I mean, most people want to follow the English Premier League because it's earning billions of pounds. Well, look at some of the things it's doing, and not just learn from how to get a big broadcast contract, but how to actually operate stadiums and to keep them safe and to make them a nice place for people to visit. So it doesn't need big tragedies, it doesn't need anybody to die, but it does need everybody to say, do you know what, We're not happy with the way it is. We want it to be different.
Pues bien, creo que habría tema para un buen rato, pero el tiempo se agota, hay que seguir con el programa, con la agenda. Michael, thank you very, very much por su conocimiento, por lo que comparte con nosotros, que será muy positivo como toda esta sesión. Muchísimas gracias.